We're with someone who knows a thing or two about trade. We're joined by Clete Willems, who up until a couple weeks ago was the Deputy Director of the National Economic Council and the lead negotiator on behalf of the White House in many of these meetings. Clete, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So talks wrapped just a couple hours ago, only about 6 hours of talks in total. It seemed cordial, but how do you interpret the way that these talks ended today?
Well, look, I think it's great that the two sides are still talking to each other. Obviously, this week started out with Chinese backtracking on some of the core commitments that the United States thought it was going to get as part of a trade deal. But Liu He still came to Washington. There still was engagements with USTR and with the Treasury Department, and I think that's a good thing. The reality is that there have been difficulties in these negotiations before, and both sides have found a way to continue to move forward, and I'm hopeful that that's going to happen here.
The Chinese reneging on part of this deal was discussed by U.S. officials as a sort of watershed moment. Did it strike you as that?
Well, I think it was very significant in the sense that it's critical to the United States that we get specific commitments from China on about how they're going to address the problems that we've had with their unfair trade practices, with forced technology transfer. But they have resisted some of those commitments in the past. So it's not entirely surprising.
Have they taken a red pen to this deal in the past?
There has been a lot of back and forth. There's no question about that. And that's why I'm saying I think we still can get to a place where there is an agreement. However, it is very significant that they aren't willing to commit to specific things at this point. And it's critical for the United States that they get those commitments so that this deal can actually be enforceable and make a difference over the long term.
The Treasury Secretary described talks as constructive. The Chinese delegation told state media that they believed the talks didn't break down, that they were constructive. But how constructive do you think talks really were if the Chinese left town and they're not still talking right at this moment inside this building?
Well, look, it's hard for me to know exactly what happened in that room. I think we're all waiting to hear more from the White House, from Ambassador Lighthizer and Secretary Mnuchin. But again, I think the fact that there was discussion and that it continues is a good thing.
The White House and various White House officials said that there would be an outcome one way or another by the end of this week. There is no outcome that we know of at this moment in time. How long do you think we could see this back and forth going on?
Well, I think the outcome that you did see was that the president decided that it was time to increase tariffs. He decided that it was time to increase leverage in these negotiations. And so that, in some ways, is what I would have described as the outcome that happened. One thing I think that's underappreciated about this is there's been a lot of discussion over time about what is the administration trying to achieve in these talks. And while I was in the administration and now on the outside, I can tell you that structural change in China is important. And I think what the president signaled this week is that a deal that doesn't include meaningful commitments on forced technology transfer isn't a deal worth having. The president has told his advisors many times that they should walk away if those aren't the kind of commitments that they're able to receive.
Do you think the president has the patience to take this battle into a second term?
Well, the reality is that there's broad bipartisan support for what the president's doing. Both Republicans and Democrats on the Hill have indicated that they want the administration to stay tough. Now, of course, I'm not going to deny that when you put tariffs in place, that does have an impact on the economy, and certainly there will be an impact on businesses and consumers over the short term. But I think what the president is trying to do is to play the long game here and look and see if there's a way to get a long-term benefit for the economy. Because ultimately, if our businesses can compete on a level playing field in China, if our businesses aren't required to turn over their technology to access the market, if their intellectual property is protected, that will be good for U.S. businesses.
But many U.S. businesses are going to be paying these tariffs when these goods reach U.S. shores. And the president's now saying that he wants to funnel those proceeds to farmers who largely are members of his base in red states. How is that going to sit with Republicans?
Well, again, I think the rhetoric that you've heard coming out of the Hill, Senator Rubio, for example, has consistently been, Mr. President, don't back down until you get a real deal that makes a lasting impact. The United States is playing the long game here. If in the short term there's a need to help out the farmers, I think the president's indicated that he's willing to do that. But again, there's a long game here that ultimately is going to benefit those businesses and those consumers who may not like the short-term impact.
It doesn't seem like a very Republican idea, and the president says that China's paying these tariffs. Do you think he fundamentally understands the economics of how tariffs work?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the president does understand what he's doing. I think it's a very calculated approach. I think ultimately what he's trying to do, as I said, is get a long-term solution where our businesses can compete more fairly in China.